The afternoon flight from Dubai to Singapore had taken off like any other journey. The sky was clear, the air smooth, and the aircraft, a massive A350, cruised at 36,000 feet with the grace of a giant bird. Inside the cabin, passengers relaxed in their seats, scrolling through movies, chatting with family, or simply drifting into sleep as soft clouds passed beneath them. In seat 22A sat a quiet woman named Sarah Mitchell. She wore a simple blue sweater, her dark hair tied neatly behind her head. She carried a small backpack and nothing else. To the world, she looked like an ordinary traveler, calm, polite, almost invisible among the 280 passengers aboard. For the first hour, nothing unusual happened. A light dinner was served, children played with their tablets, and the faint hum of the engines created a peaceful rhythm. Then, without warning, that rhythm shattered. A deep jolt shook the aircraft so violently that many passengers were thrown forward. Drinks spilled, trays crashed, and an eerie silence filled the cabin just before the real panic began. A second, stronger jolt hit, this time accompanied by a grinding metallic sound like the scream of a dying machine. People gasped, some screamed. A baby started crying loudly. The seatbelt signs turned on automatically, flashing urgently. Flight attendants rushed down the aisles, grabbing onto seats for balance. "What's happening?" a man shouted. Sarah didn't move. Her eyes narrowed, and she listened carefully, not to the passengers, but to the engines. Something sounded terribly wrong. She tightened her grip on the armrest. Then the cabin lights flickered once, twice, and suddenly the airplane dropped. Not a small dip, not minor turbulence, but a violent, stomach-ripping plunge downward. Screams filled the air. One woman fainted. A boy clutched his father's shirt as the cabin tilted to the left. Passengers prayed, cried, shouted, begged for help. Overhead bins popped open, bags flying out and hitting seats. Then came the captain's voice, shaking, broken, terrified. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have a critical emergency. Both engines have failed. We are attempting to restart. Please remain seated and—" His voice cut off for a moment. Static. Then he came back even more desperate. I'm sorry, we are doing everything we can." Those words, "I'm sorry," were enough to turn fear into full chaos. People sobbed louder. Some held hands, whispering last prayers. A woman near row 18 screamed that she didn't want to die. Beside the window, Sarah closed her eyes for a brief second. She took a deep breath, the kind that only someone trained for life-or-death crises could take. The plane shook again, harder. The floor vibrated. The nose dipped further. A young male passenger beside her panicked uncontrollably. "We're dead! We're dead! We're going down!" he cried, gripping the seat as if it would save him. Sarah finally opened her eyes and looked at him, not with fear, but with absolute steadiness. "No," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the chaos like a blade. "We are not dead, not yet." The boy stared at her, confused. What are you talking about? The engines are gone." "Yes," she replied calmly, "but this plane still has options, and so do we." Before he could ask more, Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt. The cabin crew shouted for everyone to remain seated, but Sarah walked past them with surprising stability despite the shaking aircraft. "Ma'am, you need to sit down," a flight attendant yelled, grabbing her arm. Sarah reached into her pocket and took out a worn, faded military ID. It read, "United States Air Force, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, F-18 fighter pilot, retired." The attendant's breath caught in her throat. You were military?" Sarah nodded. "I've flown worse emergencies than this. I need to get to the cockpit." The attendant stared at the ID, her hands trembling. The plane jerked again, sending people screaming. She made a decision, one based not on protocol, but on hope. "Come with me," she said quickly. They pushed through the terrified crowd, ducking falling bags and grabbing onto seats to prevent being thrown off balance. The attendants cleared a path as people stared at Sarah as if she were some kind of miracle. When they reached the cockpit door, the attendant knocked urgently. "It's an emergency. She's former military. She can help." The door unlocked after a tense second. Inside, the cockpit was chaos. Warning alarms screamed, red lights flashed across the panels, and the horizon on the display was tilted dangerously. The captain sat rigid, sweat pouring from his forehead as he wrestled with the unresponsive controls. The first officer frantically flipped switches, shaking his head. "Engines won't restart, hydraulics failing," he shouted. The captain turned, desperate. What military experience does she have? Anything will... Then he read her ID. His eyes widened. "F-18 combat pilot, Lieutenant Colonel?" Sarah nodded once. "I can help." The captain swallowed hard, looking at the controls, then at her. Do you think you can save this?" Sarah stepped forward, placing a hand on the trembling yoke. "I've handled dead stick landings before," she said. "Not in an airliner this big, but I can try." The first officer whispered, "We're dropping fast. At this rate we have minutes, maybe less." The captain struggled to breathe. "All right, take the controls." He moved aside, giving Sarah the captain's seat. She slid into it with the calm of someone who had been here hundreds of times. Her hands found the controls like they belonged there. She whispered under her breath so quietly that only she could hear. "Come on, girl, don't fight me." She scanned the instruments quickly. Airspeed dropping, altitude falling alarmingly, both engines dead, glide angle too steep. She tightened her grip on the yoke. "All right," she said. Her voice was steady. Her heartbeat was not. "I'm taking control." Her fingers danced across the controls, adjusting the pitch, easing the descent, fighting the weight of an aircraft that wanted nothing more than to fall out of the sky. The captain and first officer watched her work with stunned silence. Outside, the plane continued to plunge toward the ocean far below. But inside the cockpit, for the first time since the disaster began, there was hope. For a moment, the cockpit fell silent, except for the screaming alarms and the sound of wind rushing violently past the windows. Sarah's eyes scanned every flickering gauge, every emergency light. The A350 was dropping far too quickly, its engines lifeless, its massive wings slicing through thin air like dead weight. But her hands were steady, her breathing calm, her mind razor-sharp. "Okay," she whispered, "let's see how much glide you've got left." She adjusted the pitch by a fraction of an inch, pulling the nose up gently. The aircraft groaned, metal strained, and the vibrations intensified for a moment. Then the descent rate slowed, just barely. The first officer stared. She stabilized it. She actually stabilized it. The captain wiped his forehead. "Can we reach land?" Sarah glanced at the navigation screen. Nothing but ocean for miles, too far for a powerless glide. "No," she said quietly, "but we can pick where we go down." Her words were confident, but inside she knew the truth. Ditching a commercial airliner was nearly impossible, almost always fatal, but almost wasn't the same as certain. She wasn't going to let hundreds of people die. "Captain," she said firmly, "start preparing the cabin for emergency water landing." He nodded and lifted the intercom with trembling hands. "Brace for impact. Cabin crew, follow procedure." Outside the cockpit, the panic grew louder, but inside, Sarah blocked out everything except the instruments, the horizon, and the feel of the controls beneath her hands. "Altitude," she asked. 14,000 feet and falling," the first officer said. "Airspeed dropping." "Good, we're slowing. That'll help with the landing." "But too slow and we stall." "I know," Sarah replied. "That's why we're going to do this very carefully." She took a deep breath. Her mind flashed back to her Air Force days, flying damaged jets, handling emergencies, trusting her instincts. But this was different. This wasn't a fighter jet. This was a 300-ton commercial aircraft filled with families, children, parents, people who never imagined this nightmare. She couldn't fail them. "Captain," she said, "open the ram air turbine." He did. A loud mechanical thump echoed beneath the plane as the small turbine deployed, generating just enough backup power to give the aircraft partial hydraulic control. The yoke became slightly lighter. The screen steadied. "Better," she said. "At least now I'm not flying a brick." The ocean came into view, endless blue, stretching in every direction. They were still too high, too fast. Sarah angled the plane toward a calm patch of water. Every movement was slow, gentle, calculated. "We're at 9,000, the first officer said. "Speed 210. "Good, keep calling it." Inside the cabin, passengers cried, held hands, whispered final prayers. Some recorded goodbye videos for loved ones. Yet others, those near the front, saw the sudden stability and fell into a shocked silence. A flight attendant whispered to another, "She's saving us, that woman from 22A. Back in the cockpit, the altitude dropped rapidly. 6,000, 5,000, 4,000. Wind roared louder. The sea rose closer. Sarah steadied her breathing. "Okay, I'm flaring at 150 feet. We want to touch the water like we're kissing it, no angle too steep." The captain nodded, watching her like she was performing a miracle. At 2,000 feet, the alarms blared again. "Stall! Stall!" The nose pitched up too far. "Come on! Don't you dare stall on me," Sarah muttered, nudging the yoke forward just enough to regain speed. The stall warning stopped. 200, 1,000. The massive aircraft sliced through the air, approaching the ocean's surface with terrifying speed. Passengers screamed as the shadow of the airplane touched the waves. Sarah gripped the controls tight. "Brace!" the captain yelled into the intercom. 300, 200, 150. "Flare now," Sarah said through clenched teeth. She pulled the nose up slightly, just enough to reduce impact, but not enough to stall. 50, 40. The ocean raced toward them. Hold. Boom! The aircraft hit the water with a deafening crash, skidding violently across waves, sending massive sprays of water into the air. The cabin shook like an earthquake. Overhead, bins ripped open. People screamed and held onto anything they could grab. Seatbelts dug into bodies. Windows cracked. But the wings stayed level. The fuselage held. The aircraft slid across the surface before slowing. Then it stopped. Silence. Only the sound of water rushing outside and the beeping of emergency alarms remained. Inside the cockpit, Sarah exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding. The captain stared at her in shock. We survived," the first officer whispered. Sarah nodded once. "We did. Get the evacuation started." Emergency doors opened, slides inflated into rafts. Passengers poured out, crying, screaming, thanking God. Flight attendants guided them onto the floating platforms. Some paused to look back at Sarah as she stepped out of the cockpit, standing soaking wet, exhausted but calm. A group of passengers clapped, then more and more. Soon the entire surviving crowd was applauding her, crying, hugging, calling her a hero. The captain approached her, his voice broke. "You saved us all. Who are you?" Sarah gave a tired but gentle smile. "I'm just someone who didn't want to watch people die." Rescue boats approached from the distance, drawn by the distress call sent during the final moments of descent. Helicopters thundered overhead. Every single passenger was brought to safety. Later, on the shore, wrapped in a blanket, Sarah sat alone while reporters swarmed the survivors. She avoided cameras, avoided attention. But the captain found her again. "You could have died with us," he said, "but you chose to fight." Sarah shrugged softly. "Old habits." "What will you do now?" he asked. She looked at the horizon, calm. "Go back to my quiet life," she said, "just like before. Blue, peaceful. But people deserve to know what you did." She shook her head. "I didn't do it for people. I did it because I could." With that, she walked away from the shoreline. No applause, no fame, no medals. Just a quiet woman returning to her quiet life. After saving hundreds of strangers at 36,000 feet,